I've never considered myself someone who easily surrenders to the hunger for newness, but the truth is, sometimes change doesn't ask permission. It just arrives quietly, shifting the air around you. That summer began with a phone call from distant relatives, inviting us to spend a weekend at their country house. My husband, always practical, immediately started planning the trip. My son insisted on bringing his best friend along, something about not wanting to die of boredom. I agreed without much thought, assuming it would be one as Tekvechednik, where we would all follow the same familiar patterns, just in a different setting. We left the city behind in the late afternoon, and by the time we reached the house, the sun was already sinking behind the forest. The place was larger than I imagined, with wide windows that caught the last golden light and a terrace covered in tangled wild roses. The sense of novelty, the subtle luxury of a life not entirely ours, made me unexpectedly self-aware. I spent longer than usual unpacking, lingering over the details of what to wear for dinner. I found myself choosing a dress I'd nearly forgotten, a rich dark blue with a soft open neckline, and matching it with delicate lingerie that felt almost secretive against my skin. I told myself it was simply for comfort, but the mirror caught my hesitation. Downstairs, the evening stretched out slowly. The men occupied themselves with a game of chess, the clinking of glasses and laughter echoing from the living room. I floated between the kitchen and terrace, offering plates of cheese, slicing fruit, refilling drinks. My husband barely glanced at me, already deep in conversation with an uncle about repairs and finances. My son, phone in hand, disappeared to call friends, leaving his best friend to wander the hallways, curious and relaxed. I noticed him standing in the doorway just as I reached for a bottle of wine. There was nothing dramatic about the moment, just a glance, perhaps half a second too long, and a gentle lift of his eyebrow as I handed him a glass. He thanked me, voice low and dry, and I caught an ironic smile when he saw my dress. It shouldn't have meant anything, but something inside me shifted. A tiny, almost physical spark, like the first warm breeze before a storm. Dinner was a noisy affair, people talking over each other, memories shared and repeated. He sat across from me, and through the tangle of arms and dishes, our eyes met again. Once as I reached for the bread, my hand brushed his. The contact was so fleeting, it might as well have been accidental, yet my heart stuttered. I caught myself wondering how I looked from his side of the table, whether he could see the faintest blush creeping up my neck. After dessert, everyone drifted off. My husband and the others retreated to the den, debating over whiskey and old records. I slipped outside to the terrace, pretending to admire the stars, needing air, needing space to breathe. The cool night pressed against my bare arms. I leaned on the railing, closing my eyes, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that nothing had happened, that I was simply tired from the road. I heard footsteps. When I opened my eyes, he was there, leaning against the doorframe, a shadow in the dim light. We spoke in that careful, almost casual tone adults use when they know the conversation is dangerous. He teased me about the city, about how the country suits you, and I replied with a smile, letting my guard drop a fraction. Our words tangled the silence between them, saying more than we allowed. I saw the way his gaze lingered on my collarbone before he looked away. There was nothing more. Not yet. We said goodnight and returned inside, each pretending not to notice the other's presence as we climbed the stairs to separate rooms. But in the dark, lying next to my husband's slow, steady breath, I felt the memory of that look pulse through me, stubborn and hot, like a second heartbeat I hadn't asked. That night, the country house felt impossibly large, and every quiet sound seemed charged with a promise I couldn't yet name. Morning would come soon enough, and with it another day, another chance to pretend that nothing had changed, even as the world tilted just a little beneath my feet. Mornings in the country never resembled the ones in our city apartment. The light was softer here, with the faint smell of pine and fresh earth floating through the open windows, nudging me awake before the alarm. I let my husband sleep, his back already turned, his face half buried in the pillow, and slipped out of bed quietly, listening for signs of life in the house. There was a sense of suspension, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the subtle tension that had seeped into me overnight. I dressed deliberately, choosing a thin robe over a set of new lingerie I'd packed almost without thinking. The fabric felt cool against my skin, a small luxury that I savored, even as a wave of guilt threatened to intrude. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet. I busied myself with coffee, moving slowly, taking in the hush of early morning and the way the sunlight crept across the counter. My son wandered in first, still half asleep, mumbled a greeting, and vanished again with his phone. The house gradually filled with the ordinary sounds of breakfast, clattering cutlery bursts of laughter, the crackle of toast. But beneath it all, I sensed something unsaid, an energy that seemed to gather in corners and shadows. He appeared when I was alone carrying 2 mugs of coffee, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Thought you'd want the strong one," he said, setting it down beside me. I thanked him, careful not to meet his eyes for too long, but my composure slipped when his fingers brushed mine around the handle. The touch was brief, nothing for anyone else to notice, but my body tensed, a shiver running up my spine. For a moment, I couldn't think clearly, couldn't quite trust my own hands. After breakfast, the day fell into a kind of rhythm: errands, small tasks, the men planning a barbecue, the kids exploring the garden. I drifted through it, taking refuge. In chores, the sound of voices drifted from the terrace, but I was focused on the simple choreography of cooking the chop and slide of vegetables, the warmth of the oven. My husband stepped into the kitchen to ask about the wine and didn't seem to notice my distracted answers. He was thinking of logistics of groceries and grilling, and for a brief moment I felt almost invisible, a shadow passing through a familiar life. It was nearly noon when the house emptied, everyone scattering to their own pursuits. I was left alone in the kitchen, the only movement the sunlight gliding across the tiles. I paused to look out the window, catching my reflection in the glass. A woman standing on the edge of something unnamed heart, pounding for reasons she would never admit. That was when he appeared again, pausing in the doorway with a casual, almost hesitant posture. He crossed the room ostensibly to grab a bottle of water from the fridge, but I sensed the shift in his breathing as he stepped closer. The silence between us stretched. I tried to busy myself at the counter, but he moved behind me, his presence unmistakable, his hand landing lightly on my waist as he reached past. I should have pulled away. I knew I should have. But instead, I froze, feeling the warmth of his touch through the thin robe, the nearness of his body, a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. He lingered just a second too long, then turned me gently to face him. My heart thundered. There was no preamble, no nervous laughter, just a raw honesty in the way he looked at me, seeing something I hadn't shown anyone in years. For a moment, the air between us was so charged I thought I might shatter. Then without a word, he leaned in, and our lips met. It was quick, almost desperate, nothing like the slow-burning moments from novels or films. There was an urgency to it, a hunger that made my knees tremble. My hands came up to his chest. Automatically, fingers splayed in an unconscious act of both resistance and invitation. I felt the world narrow, every sense tuned to the sensation of his mouth, the press of his hand on the small of my back, the dizzying combination of shame and exhilaration. Then just as suddenly he stepped away, I was left breathless, hands still hovering in the air, uncertain of what I'd allowed. We stared at each other, the truth of what had happened passing between us, in a silence that felt as fragile as glass. He spoke first, voice lower than usual. I shouldn't have, but I shook my head, unable to find words, my cheeks burning with 1,000 conflicting emotions. The rest of the day moved strangely, every sound sharp, every moment colored by that secret. I avoided my husband's gaze, unable to read his mood, and found myself replaying the kiss in my mind, the taste, the heat, the trembling in my limbs. Later, alone in my room, I touched my lips, as if to confirm that it had happened, tracing the outline left by him. I watched myself in the change, but nothing revealed itself. Outwardly, I was the same woman I'd always been. Inside, the foundation had shifted. By evening, as we all gathered for dinner, I could feel the difference in the way I moved, the way I responded to every small interaction. My son laughed at a joke I barely registered. My husband poured me a glass of wine with his usual distracted affection. Across the table, our eyes met once more, and I knew neither of us would sleep easily that night. When the conversation lulled, I excused myself and stepped out onto the terrace again, the night air cool against my bare arms. I tried to steady my breath to let the darkness wash away the turmoil, but I couldn't shake the memory of his mouth, the heat of his hand, the reckless hope curling deep inside my chest. The world was unchanged, but I was not. And somewhere in the quiet, as the others drifted off to bed, I realized that I was already waiting for the next moment, the next excuse, the next slip in routine that might bring us close again. The return to the city after those days in the country brought no relief, only a kind of restless longing that shadowed every hour. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that distance and routine would dilute the memory of that kiss, that the demands of daily life would press me back into the narrow, familiar outlines of myself. But longing once awakened is not so easily banished. If anything, the city's pace made my need more acute. Every crowded street, every noise from a neighbor's apartment, every mundane errand seemed to sharpen the contrast between what I was expected to feel and what I truly felt. My husband's energy was unchanged. He filled his days with projects, meetings, little upgrades to our home. Sometimes I watched him from across the room, thinking that anyone looking in would see the perfect stability. Two adults in practiced orbit, each moving efficiently through the shared architecture of marriage. He noticed nothing, or if he did, he kept it tucked away, not daring to disturb the fragile peace of our routine. We dined together. We spoke of bills and plans we touched in all the right ways. But it felt more and more like a dance I was only pretending to remember. My son remained as ever engrossed in his world, half digital, half adolescent. He drifted in and out of conversations, sometimes laughing with me, sometimes confiding in his friend, the one who now occupied so much more of my attention than I dared admit. The first week after our return, my son invited him over for dinner, casual as always. I agreed, trying to maintain the mask of indifference, yet my heart raced from the moment I heard the bell. He entered with a confidence that bordered on irreverence, joking with my son, teasing about the state of the apartment, trading banter that was sharp and lively. When he greeted me, his eyes lingered a beat too long. "Glad to see you survived the wild," he quipped, lips twitching with a private amusement. I managed to smile, but inside I was a riot of nerves, every word heavy with possibility. If my husband noticed the undercurrent, he gave no sign, busying himself with the oven and the news on TV. That evening, the conversation at dinner threaded through work, sports, gossip-safe territory. But beneath the surface, something had changed. The way he watched me, the subtlety of his remarks, the way our knees almost touched beneath the table. At one point, my husband stepped out to take a phone call. My son disappeared into his room. I was left alone in the kitchen, scraping plates, when he followed me in. The kitchen felt too small, the silence too loud. "Did you bring back any of that country wine?" he asked, glancing over my shoulder at the counter. I played along, answering softly, "I thought you'd had enough the first night." He smiled, eyes warm, but edged with something hungry. "Some things you can never have enough of." The moment stretched close, charged, neither of us willing to move. I could smell the citrus soap on his skin, the hint of aftershave, the living reality of him so close behind me. My fingers trembled on the plate. I turned, finding him watching me, unguarded, letting his mask slip. For a split second, I saw the real risk, how easy it would be to reach for him, how little effort it would take to cross a line. I broke the moment by clearing my throat and stepping away, pretending to rinse the sink. He lingered as if considering whether to follow, then let the tension fade with a quiet, "maybe next time," before joining my son in the living room. That night, sleep was a wishful thing. I lay awake, tangled in sheets, mind racing. It wasn't just the physical memory of his lips, or the secret thrill of forbidden possibility, it was the way I had started to come alive around him. I wanted that feeling, wanted to step out of my skin and risk everything for it, and yet the cost haunted me. I had a life built on quiet agreements and unspoken trust. I had a husband who, for all his distractions, believed in me. I had a son who still needed me, even as he tried to separate himself from my world. The next day, I tried to chase away the thoughts with errands: grocery store, pharmacy, post office. Each stop a rehearsal for normalcy, but then my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Let's get out." Night walk. Short, casual, but impossible to misinterpret. I told my husband I was meeting an old friend for coffee, a lie that tasted sour but freed me just the same. That evening, the city air was thick and damp, headlights streaking the rain-polished streets. He met me outside a bookstore, hands deep in his jacket pockets, grin wry and hopeful. We walked together without purpose, our conversation drifting from books to city lights to things we both wanted and couldn't say. I found myself talking about fears I'd kept hidden even from myself, about feeling invisible, about craving something unnamed. He listened, truly listened, not with the pretense of understanding, but with a patient, hungry empathy. We ducked into the store, its narrow aisles sheltering us from the world. The light was golden and soft, the air thick with the scent of paper and dust. We wandered close, but not touching, voices low. In a quiet back corner, we stopped, hands brushing as we both reached for the same book. He didn't pull away. For a heartbeat, our eyes met, and everything else fell away. The city, the marriage, the consequences. Just two people held in the psi-electric charge of a moment. "Are you going to let yourself have what you want?" he murmured. Not quite a question, not quite a dare. I shook my head, the truth caught between fear and longing. "I don't know," I said, voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, then sad and bright at once, and stepped back, giving me room. We left the shop together, the rain now a thin mist, our hands empty but our bodies burning with the unspoken. I knew as we parted at the corner that I had crossed a threshold. The world I returned to was the same, but I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. My skin remembered, my mind replayed, and in the quiet, I listened for the echo of his question, afraid of how much I wanted to answer yes. It is strange the way tension builds in silence, the way a single spoken word can unravel weeks of careful pretending. Our life settled back into its steady, practiced routine, but beneath the ordinary breakfast together, errands, gentle questions about my day, something restless was taking root. The weather shifted, the city turned gray and restless, and I felt my own mood echoing the sky, full of a disquiet I could neither name nor dispel. My husband moved through the apartment, with more energy than usual, as if determined to busy himself into forgetting some vague worry. I watched him try flowers, a bottle of my favorite wine talk of a weekend away, gestures that seemed both touching and oddly mechanical, as if he were checking off a list he'd found in some advice column. At first, I tried to respond with gratitude. I told myself that this was how marriage worked, how long love demanded effort. I wore the new perfume he'd bought, put on the earrings he liked, prepared meals he'd mentioned missing from our first years together. But the responses felt flat, my body only half present in the room. Even in bed when he reached for me, I could not meet his eyes. His touch, once so easy and familiar, felt somehow foreign. My mind drifted, returning again and again to the memory of stolen glances, to the weight of another man's gaze, to the electricity of a brief encounter in a bookstore. The distance between us grew in inches and then in miles. One evening, after a long day of rain and errands, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I saw a woman trying to piece herself together, but behind her careful posture was a tremor of uncertainty. I had spent too long feeling needed only for the roles I played, mother, wife, planner-keeper of routines. Desire had been something I rationed, doled out for special occasions, or when the mood struck, but now it flared in me at odd moments when I brushed my hair, when I buttoned a blouse, when I caught the faint scent of aftershave on a passing stranger. I began to crave not simply affection, but recognition, a sense of being seen. And that craving, sharper each day, was pulling me further away from the man I once thought would be enough. The argument began small, as these things do. My husband asked me to join him for a late dinner out. I was tired, the rain still falling hard against the windows, and I hesitated, saying I'd rather stay in. He pressed, "Too much, too soon," and I felt irritation spark. "Why are you always so distant lately?" he demanded, frustration thickening his voice. "I'm trying. Can't you see that I tried to explain, but the words tangled? It's not you, I'm just... I don't know. Maybe I need some space. Space from what?" He shot back. "From me? From us? Or is it something else?" His tone stung, and for the first time in years I found myself speaking without the filter of politeness, my anger flaring. You act like everything can be fixed with flowers or dinner. It's not that simple. The silence that followed was enormous, filled with all the things we hadn't said for months, maybe years. He left the room without another word. I heard him turn on the TV in the living room, the muffled noise a barrier between us. I sat alone in the dim kitchen, tracing the rim of my glass, fighting the urge to cry. The guilt always there, always ready, tightened in my chest. But underneath was something else too. Relief. Relief that for once the performance had broken and the truth had come leaking out, even if it was ugly and raw. Later that night as I lay awake, I heard my son's quiet footsteps in the hallway. He paused by our door, and I wondered if he had heard, if he was piecing together the cracks he must have sensed for weeks. I wanted to reach out to him, to promise him that everything would be all right, but I didn't trust my own words. Instead, I listened as he walked away, the silence in the apartment becoming heavier with each step. I turned to my phone, scrolling through old messages, pausing at the ones from the man who had become both temptation and solace. I reread his short notes, the private jokes and little provocations. I typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed it again. In the end, I sent only a word: awake. The response came almost immediately. Always, for you. His words, simple and unembellished, landed with a weight that surprised me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my husband, and padded softly to the kitchen. The world outside was dark, the city muffled by rain. I opened the window, letting in the cool night air, and called him. We spoke in hushed voices, not about the kiss, not about my marriage, but about the weather, about old music, about memories that had nothing to do with the mess I was making. His laughter soothed me, made the walls feel less close, my breathing less shallow. "Do you ever regret any of it?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment, then answered, "Regret is a waste of time. I'd rather feel something real, even if it hurts." After the call, I stood in the kitchen a long time watching the city lights blur through the rain. I realized I didn't want to go back to sleep, didn't want to return to the bed where everything felt forced and unfinished. In that moment, I understood how deeply I had changed. I no longer wanted to be safe. I wanted to be seen to be alive, even if it meant burning everything that had once made me feel secure. The next morning, my husband greeted me with tired eyes. We exchanged polite words, but neither of us mentioned the fight. We moved around each other carefully, as if afraid to touch anything that might collapse. My son watched us both silent, waiting for someone to say what needed to be said. I put on my earrings, sprayed the new perfume, and stepped out into the rain, letting it washed the last of last night's tears from my face. The day ahead felt uncertain, and yet for the first time I wasn't afraid of what might come. The days that followed were like moving through a house with creaking floors, every step a question of what might give way next. My husband and I drifted in and out of conversations, neither of us willing to address the rupture that had cracked open between us. At times, his gestures toward me became almost desperate. Unexpected embraces in the hallway, a hand lingering on my back, as I cooked late-night invitations to share a drink on the sofa. But I met these efforts with an uneasy distance, my responses half-hearted, as if the script for our marriage had become suddenly unfamiliar. My body, once so attuned to his, now registered his touch like a faded memory, something to be recalled but never relived. I felt at once guilty and numb, haunted by the knowledge that the version of myself he sought to revive no longer existed. It was my son's suggestion to spend the weekend outside the city at a lakeside park we used to visit when he was younger. "Let's get out, do something together, just us," he said. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know before adolescence had made him wary and withdrawn. I agreed without hesitation, perhaps hoping the change of scenery would clear the air, or at the very least allow us to pretend, if only for a day, that things were as they once were. We packed sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and my son insisted on inviting his friend, arguing that he always brings good luck. My husband seemed to welcome the company, eager for anything that might distract us from the awkward choreography of our home. I dressed carefully that morning, not for my husband or even for myself, but for the possibility of being noticed by someone who saw the version of me that I now longed to inhabit. I chose a loose linen dress, the fabric soft against my skin, and beneath it a new set of lingerie. Pale and delicate, the kind meant to be a secret. The park was alive with sunlight and laughter, families sprawled across picnic blankets, children shrieking along the water's edge. For the first time in weeks, I felt the beginning of lightness, though it was precarious, a sensation as fragile as the surface of the lake. We ate in a circle under the trees, talking about everything and nothing, our voices mingling with the hum of other lives. The friend was easy relaxed. He joked with my husband, nudged my son, offered to fetch more coffee when the thermos ran dry. At some point, as the sun climbed higher, I drifted away from the group, seeking shade beneath a stand of tall, swaying pines. The air was cooler there, scented with resin and earth, and for a while I allowed myself to simply breathe. I heard footsteps unhurried and turned to find him approaching, hands in his pockets, an uncertain smile playing at the edges of his mouth. He stopped a few feet away, studying me as if weighing a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. "I wondered if you'd run off," he said softly, a note of mock disappointment in his voice. I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised me. "I thought about it," I admitted, "but the water's too cold." There was a pause, not awkward but full, a quiet in which anything might have been said. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You seem different lately, lighter, or maybe just braver." I met his eyes, feeling suddenly exposed and grateful all at once. "I don't know if it's bravery," I replied, "but I'm tired of pretending." He stepped nearer, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the pulse at his throat. "You don't have to pretend with me," he whispered. My heart was beating so loudly, I thought he might hear it, might see through the calm mask I wore for everyone else. The world seemed to shrink, the laughter and shouts from the picnic fading to a distant blur. I didn't plan. I simply reached for him, my hand finding his, our fingers lacing together. The kiss that followed was nothing like the hurried, stolen moment in the kitchen weeks before. It was slow, deliberate, a claiming and a release at once. His mouth was warm, gentle but insistent, and I felt the careful defenses I had built around myself begin to dissolve. For those few seconds there was no marriage, no history, no consequence, only the two of us suspended in a bubble of possibility. When we parted, the space between us vibrated with everything we dared not say. We walked back to the group separately, my face flushed, my steps lighter. No one seemed to notice. My husband was deep in conversation with my son, their voices blending with the wind. I sat beside them, feeling both apart and more present than I had in months, the secret of what had just passed between me and the friend pulsing quietly beneath my skin. Later, as we packed to leave, he caught my eye across the clearing and smiled, not a triumphant or possessive smile, but one that acknowledged our new silent bond. In the car ride home, my husband reached for my hand, and for a brief, disorienting moment, I squeezed back, grateful for the warmth, even as my thoughts wandered elsewhere. That night, lying in bed with my husband's arm draped loosely over my waist, I replayed the scene under the trees over and over. My lips still tingled from his touch, and I felt a dangerous sense of freedom, a hunger that no longer wished to be hidden. I was no longer afraid of what I wanted. The question now was how long I could live with the ache of wanting both everything and nothing at all. As I drifted towards sleep, the boundaries of my old life blurred, and the world seemed charged with new potential. Morning, I knew, would bring its own challenges, its own complications, but for now, I allowed myself to imagine that a different future, one where I could be truly seen, might still be possible. The aftermath of that kiss lingered in ways I could never have predicted. There was a feverishness to my thoughts, a pulse that quickened each time my phone vibrated, or when I found myself alone with my own memory. I had imagined naively that such a moment would offer release, that the act itself would somehow relieve the tension, allow me to slip back into the routines of my life. Instead, it was as if a part of me had been awakened, one I didn't know how to calm or reason with. I moved through the days with a sharp awareness, watching for him in every reflection, hearing echoes of our conversation in every pause. My husband seemed almost relieved by the success of our family outing. He spoke more kindly, made small talk at dinner, and proposed a series of projects around the apartment that required my opinion or presence. It was clear he was trying in his own way to draw me back into his orbit. I let myself be pulled along, sometimes feeling a ghost of our old intimacy, in the casual way his hand brushed mine, the warmth of his laughter at a shared memory. But the gap between us only grew more pronounced with each attempt at closeness. I began to wonder if love was not a matter of grand betrayals or unforgivable acts, but the slow, silent drift apart, a daily choice not to reach across the distance. My son was quieter than usual, as if he too sensed something he could not name. I caught him watching me, searching my face for signs of reassurance. I wanted to tell him that I was still his mother, that nothing essential had changed. Yet every attempt at comfort felt false. A performance for an audience I was slowly losing in was in this state of uneasy balance that the messages from his friend began to arrive more frequently. Sometimes it was just a joke, a comment about a book I'd mentioned, a photo of a place we both knew. Other times it was a single word thinking, or a string of ellipses, an invitation to continue the conversation we had started beneath the trees. I told myself to resist, to pull away, but the lure of being truly seen, truly wanted, was too strong. Each message was a jolt, a secret adrenaline that cut through the monotony of the day. One afternoon, as I stood in the kitchen waiting for water to boil, my phone buzzed. The message was simple: meet me. I hesitated, watching the clock, calculating how long I could be gone before anyone would notice. My husband was due home in an hour. My son was out with friends. My heart beat against my ribs with a mixture of excitement and dread. I put on a coat, ignoring the trembling in my hands, and left. We met at a small cafe on a side street, the kind where the tables were close and the lighting dim. He was already there, seated by the window, tracing patterns on the rim of his cup. When he looked up, his expression was open, expectant, but tinged with uncertainty. I sat down, aware of the thousand ways this could go wrong. We spoke quietly, our conversation, a careful dance around everything we could not say aloud. He told me about his work, his plans, the little frustrations that made up his days. I listened, grateful for the way he allowed me to be someone other than wife or mother, if only for a moment. After a pause, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. The contact was electric, barely a touch, yet charged with intent. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I keep replaying everything." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself against the pull of his words. I wanted to be honest, to confess the depth of my own longing, but fear held me back. I worried that speaking the truth would make it real, that I would lose the fragile illusion of control I still clung to. Instead, I looked at him, searching his face for some answer I could not articulate. "It's not simple," I said finally. "It never is." He laughed softly, a sound of resignation. "Nothing real ever is." We lingered over our drinks, neither willing to end the meeting. When we finally stood to leave, he walked with me to the corner, the city bustling around us. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like to step fully into this new life, to claim the passion that had been denied for so long. But as we parted, reality crept back, in the obligations waiting at home, the silent accusations that would greet me in every familiar room. That evening I moved through the apartment with a heightened sensitivity, aware of the way my husband watched me, the careful way he asked about my day. I answered with practiced ease, but guilt pulsed beneath the surface, an ache that refused to settle. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. The desire for something more intimacy, more risk, more life crowded out the peace that used to come so easily. In the weeks that followed, secrecy became my new normal. I found myself orchestrating errands that led me near his workplace, choosing clothes that made me feel bold, indulging in private fantasies during the quiet moments of the afternoon. Each encounter, however brief, left me more desperate for the next. My world had shrunk to a series of charged exchanges, messages hidden beneath the mundane, and glances that spoke volumes in silence. Yet beneath the excitement, a current of fear ran deeper. I lived in dread of discovery. A misplaced phone, a careless message, a glance held a fraction too long in public. I knew the cost, knew that what I risked was not just my own happiness, but the delicate architecture of the family I had built. Still, the hunger was stronger than the fear. I clung to the hope that there might be a way forward, a path that allowed for both honesty and desire, though I could not yet see what it was. The night before everything changed, I stood on the balcony watching the city's lights flicker in the darkness. I wrapped my arms around myself, unsure whether I was trying to hold myself together or keep from unraveling completely. I thought of the friend's words, of the way he looked at me, and for the first time I wondered if longing alone was enough to build a life on, or if in the end it would only ever be a beautiful kind of ruin. The fragile web of secrecy I had woven began to unravel, not with a grand gesture, but with the smallest of accidents, one of those trivial everyday missteps that might on any other day pass unnoticed. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the city caught under a wash of gray sky, the apartment heavy with the muffled sound of water against the windows. My husband was working from home, my son sprawled on the couch with his headphones on, lost to the world. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone scrolling through a week's worth of messages, each one a tiny escape, a reminder of the other life humming beneath the surface of my days. He had sent me a photo, a street mural he'd found a burst of color in the dreariness. Beneath it, just one word, thinking. I smiled, typing a reply, only to hear my son's voice behind me, sudden and unguarded. "Who's that?" I startled, fumbling to lock the screen, my cheeks burning with the realization of how easily I could be exposed. "Just a friend from book club," I lied, the words coming out too quickly, too practiced. He shrugged, but his gaze lingered a second too long, curiosity and suspicion flickering in his eyes. From that moment, the air in our home seemed altered. My son watched me more closely, his conversations shorter, his eyes narrowing when my phone buzzed or when I drifted into another room to take a call. My husband, too, became more attentive, not in the gentle, absent-minded way of before, but with a quiet, watchful intensity. I found myself overcompensating, smiling more, asking about their days, cooking favorite meals, but the strain of holding everything together frayed the edges of my composure. A few days later, the inevitable happened. We decided almost as a family to go out for dinner, a neutral ground, a way to shake the heaviness that had settled in the apartment. My son invited his friend, who accepted with the easy confidence that had always marked his presence. Sitting together in the softly lit restaurant, I felt the weight of too many glances, too much unsaid, pressing down on all of us. My husband ordered wine. My son scrolled through his phone, and across the table, the friend raised his glass in a small, private salute. He toasted, voice low but clear enough for only me to catch. To good company and unexpected adventures. I caught the glint in his eye, the private challenge, and forced a smile, feeling the way my pulse raced beneath my skin. My son looked up, gaze shifting between us, as if measuring the charge in the air, testing the meaning of every word. Later that evening, as we returned home, my son lingered in the entryway, pretending to check messages. He called his friend, over voice tight. I overheard only the tail end of the conversation, but the words hit me like ice. "Is there something going on between you and my mother?" There was a pause, a quiet so deep I could hear my own heart pounding from the DM. "Next room." The friend answered, his voice careful, steady. "Your mom is important to me, but nothing's happening that you need to worry about." It was a lie, but a merciful one, and I clung to it, grateful for the cover, even as shame burned through. Me. My son came to me later, eyes wary. "You've been different. I want to know if you're okay." His vulnerability undid me. I knelt, taking his hand, searching for words. "I am okay. I promise." I said, hating myself for how incomplete the truth was. That night, the apartment felt unbearably small. I moved from room to room, unable to settle. My husband sat in the living room reading, but I saw the way he glanced up every time I crossed his line of sight. The friend messaged a simple, "Are you all right?" and I typed a reply, deleting it before I could send. My life felt suspended, waiting for something to break, knowing that it would. The next morning brought no relief. My son barely spoke to me. My husband's gestures were gentle but edged with tension, and I felt every breath sharpened by anticipation and dread. When the friend called to check in, his voice was strained. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "It's not fair to them or to us." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the ache there. "I know. I just don't know how to stop." He was silent for a long moment. "Maybe it's time for the truth, or at least time to decide who you want to be." As the call ended, I stood at the window, the city sprawling endlessly before me, rain streaking down the glass like tears. I realized I was no longer afraid of losing what I had. I was afraid of never truly living, of letting all my desires go unspoken, unlived, until they turned to ash inside me. Even as I tried to return to routine, nothing felt the same. Every word, every glance was loaded, every silence brimming with the possibility of revelation. The secret I had carried for so long was now shared, if not openly then, in the nervous glances and half-answers of those around me. I understood finally that the cost of pretending was growing too high, and the time for decisions, real irreversible ones, was drawing close. I had always thought that the greatest threat to my marriage would be some explosive discovery, a secret message accidentally left open, a conversation overheard, an unmistakable sign. But the truth was more insidious. It was in the pauses, the nervous glances, the polite restraint that invaded our home. My husband and I began to live beside each other, careful not to touch the places where the tension hummed loudest. Our son moved through the apartment with the wary silence of someone who knows too much but cannot ask, his eyes flickering between us, searching for some reassurance we were not able to give. Days bled into each other, the air in the house thickening with expectation and fear. I noticed small changes. My husband would linger at the window, his coffee cooling beside him. He would leave his phone face down on the table or close his laptop when I entered the room. The rituals of our life meals, shared chores, even the soft, half-spoken exchanges at bedtime became weighted, as if each one was a test we were all afraid to fail. Sometimes I caught myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for signs of the person I used to be. There were mornings when I would put on lipstick fuss with my hair, choosing my clothes not for my husband, but for the possibility of being noticed by someone else. I hated myself for it, and yet felt powerless to stop. I found relief only in the rare secret meetings with my son's friend, brief moments arranged under the flimsiest of pretexts that left me aching for more and fearful of what might happen next. One evening I returned home later than usual. My husband was waiting, his expression unreadable. The apartment was quiet. Our son had gone out, leaving only the two of us in the fading golden light. I hung my coat, feeling the tension coil tighter. He didn't greet me, but instead gestured toward the kitchen table. On it lay my phone, the screen aglow with a message I had missed in my rush. "Call me when you get home." My breath caught. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked, voice measured, almost gentle. I struggled for words, knowing that every second of hesitation was its own confession. "It's not what you think," I whispered, hating how false it sounded. "Then what is it?" His voice cracked, not with anger, but with pain. There was a world of unspoken things in his eyes. "You don't talk to me anymore. You're always somewhere else." I tried to reach for him, but he recoiled, shaking his head. That night I lay awake, tracing the lines of light across the ceiling, listening to my husband's steady breathing. I wanted to believe I could fix what had broken, to patch the fabric of our life before the tear grew too wide. But the desire to be honest, to finally drop the mask, fought with the instinct to protect what little remained. I felt caught between the woman I had become and the woman I was supposed to be, my heart stretched so thin I thought it might break. The next morning I made coffee for both of us, leaving his cup by the window where he liked it. He thanked me, his voice hollow. Our son ate in silence, barely touching his food. When I reached for his hand, he pulled away, his shoulders hunched. I wanted to tell him I loved him, that nothing would change between us, but the words were clumsy, inadequate. I could see the question in his eyes. How long had I been gone, even while living under the same roof that afternoon the friend called? I hesitated before answering, my voice low and tight. "I can't keep doing this," I said. "It's hurting everyone." His answer was gentle understanding. "You have to decide. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family." For hours after the call, I wandered the apartment in a daze, picking up laundry, watering plants, touching objects that suddenly seemed strange and unfamiliar. The home I had built now felt like a museum of all the lives I had tried to live: devoted wife, attentive mother, secret lover. Each identity pulling me in a different direction, none of them enough. That evening, my son came home late. He hovered by the door, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice wavering. "You don't seem like yourself." I wanted to say something honest, something that would anchor us both, but all I managed was, "I'm sorry, I really am." He nodded, the words hanging between us heavy and unresolved. That night my husband slept on the far edge of the bed, his back to me, his body a silent wall. I lay staring into the darkness, haunted by the realization that I had reached the end of something. There would be no more pretending, no more comfort and routine. My only choices now were to hide until I disappeared completely, or to step into the uncertain light of the truth, no matter what it might cost. I knew as I finally drifted toward sleep that the reckoning I had feared was inevitable. And as morning crept into the apartment, soft and merciless, I felt the first true wave of freedom, bitter and sharp, settle in my chest. Dawn arrived quietly, but there was nothing soft about the clarity it brought. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, illuminating dust in the air, exposing the ordinariness of a life that no longer fit me. For the first time in months, I woke before anyone else, sitting at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug, feeling the slow spread of resolve. I listened to the hush of the apartment, the gentle creaks and distant traffic, the echoes of every choice I had made. There was no more space left for pretending, no more comfort in denial, no more room for excuses. I knew what I had to do, and I dreaded it. Not for the confrontation, not even for the shame that would inevitably surface, but for the finality. Once spoken, certain truths cannot be recalled. They settle over everything, over memories, over hopes for forgiveness, with a weight that can never be shifted back into the shadows. I waited until the late morning, until my husband and son had both made their way into the kitchen, each carrying the exhaustion of the last few weeks in their posture and eyes. I called them together, voice trembling only slightly. My son slouched at the table, refusing to look at me. My husband remained standing, arms crossed, his gaze steady and unreadable. The space between us felt both intimate and cavernous. "Need to talk to you," I began, my voice low but steady. "I haven't been honest, not with myself, not with you." My words seemed to drop into the room like stones in water ripples, spreading the silence thickening. For a moment I considered softening the confession, sparing them the worst of it. But I owed myself more than that. "I haven't been faithful," I said. "I let something grow between me and someone else. It wasn't planned, but it happened, and I can't lie about it anymore." My son's head snapped up, anger and betrayal flickering across his face, then settling into a blank hurt. My husband's expression didn't change. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself against a blow. I kept talking, compelled by a need to explain, to untangle the knot of my heart. I spoke of loneliness, of wanting to be seen, of the fear of vanishing into a life of routine and silence. I told them I loved them, that none of it was their fault. The words were clumsy, raw, but I gave them everything I had, voice breaking in places, tears spilling despite my efforts to hold them back. There were no accusations from my husband, only a long, exhausted silence. At last he turned away, picking up his keys and leaving the apartment without a word. My son pushed away from the table, disappearing into his room, the slam of the door, a punctuation mark that echoed in the hollow space of my chest. I sat alone, letting the stillness settle, feeling the enormity of what I had done. My mind chased. Old memories, laughter in the kitchen, late-night conversations, the fragile trust that had once bound us together. I wondered if those things could ever be recovered, or if I had finally, irrevocably broken something essential. Sometime in the afternoon, the friend called. His voice was quiet, his words careful. "Is it over?" He asked, not with hope or expectation, but with the resignation of someone who understood the cost. I told them. I replied, "I had to." There was a pause. "I'm here if you need me, but you have to decide what you want now. For you. When the call ended, I sat by the window watching the slow movement of clouds. The city stretched before me, indifferent, vast, full of possibilities and regrets. I understood then that whatever happened next, I would have to live with the eye. Consequences good or bad, and that my longing for freedom had always been a longing to be whole, even if wholeness came at the price of comfort. As the sun began to set, I rose and gathered my things. The apartment felt different, emptier, but somehow larger, as if the air itself had shifted. I stood at the threshold for a long moment, hand on the door, breathing in the quiet. There was grief, yes, but also a sense of strange, hard-won peace, a kind of acceptance I had never known. I stepped outside, feeling the first true rush of cool air against my skin, uncertain of what the future held, but certain at last that I would no longer hide from it. Whatever came next, it would be mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to believe that being honest, even when it meant losing everything I once thought defined me, might also be the only way to finally belong to myself.